Hello, everyone. We will resume the section. Hi. So the next section is marine robotic systems. And we will have the first speaker, Professor Jones from Marine Science in KAUST. And his title is Frontiers in Marine Research Robotics. And let's welcome.
And I would like to grab the microphone just three seconds. Well, we're very fortunate that this conference has great speakers and great question askers. And what I would like to request is when you ask your questions, you can introduce yourself by name and institution. That will hopefully favor the creation of more contacts during the off times of this conference, whether it's a break like this or during lunch. So thank you very much for your attention. And now, Bert, the show is yours.
Okay, thanks, Eric, and thank you all. It's good to see you all here. It's been great to reconnect with some people that I haven't seen since pre-COVID. So it's I'm going to give a talk, sort of a little bit of an overview of what I titled Frontiers in Marine Research. I put two collaborators, but I think Mike Berriman's talk earlier showed the greater scope of people within the Red Sea Research Center. And I think probably appropriately a lot of what I will talk about overlaps with some of the other talks that are being given. And so I really have to attribute what we're going to talk about to discussions among a large number of people. When we look at the potential applications of robotics, I mean, we've already seen the need for automation. One of the challenges that happens, we're talking a lot about coral reefs, is extending the ability to observe beyond the depth that divers generally operate. Another need that's very clear, and I know many people are interested in this, is the role of collaboratives and swarm-based oceanographic observations. Our traditional approach to oceanography comes from ship-based mapping, which was our primary mode, then satellite imaging. Now with the availability of robotic systems, I believe we're in an era where we have to change our perspective on how we think about sampling the ocean. And finally, there's the deep frontier of the frontier of the deep ocean, which has yet to be explored, but is going to become a big emphasis. When we talk about sampling systems, I'm going to make a progression from the shallow to the deep. And we've also already seen some of the images. Miriam talked about the need for imaging shallow systems in the digital reef. You know, and clearly a high need there is high resolution imaging. That imaging can be both the visual, it's also not only using the typical color spectrum, but using multispectral, getting into fluorescence signatures, creating various kinds of imaging there. Another need in this area, which has been mentioned, is the need for robotic manipulation. Raquel Peixoto, who I think is going to speak later and is one of the co-organizers, works in probiotics. There's a need to be able to inoculate corals with probiotics. We talked about, there's the Shusha Island Reef Restoration Initiative. I think somebody already asked the question, how are we going to place 5,000 corals a day? I think the robotics is part of the answer to that. And then another one is simply sampling, observing the system repeatedly, not only being able to observe it with imaging and sensing systems, but perhaps robots that can actually go out and take the samples themselves and bring them back. And then we talked about the idea of monitoring robotic patrolling of systems, looking at ecological systems. Again, what's an optimal time frame for that? So this is a high need in the environmental systems we're working in. When we look at the higher resolution imaging, there was talk earlier about the digital twins of the reefs. These have been created by a person with a multi-camera system swimming over the reefs. This is a work by the Center for Environmental Imaging out of UC San Diego, Stuart Sandin's group. And one of the needs in the robotics is we need to operate close to the structures. So we need to operate at a level of within about 5 meters or closer to the system. Second is obstacle avoidance. You've already seen some of the coral reef structures. They're complex three-dimensional systems. So obstacle avoidance, working in complex terrains is a key need there. And not in that can be very tight, contained spaces. And with that, we want the robots to develop intelligence, to have the ability to initially map a space, then remember and memorize it and be able to return to it repeatedly for long-term sampling. And another thing, we generally think of the coral reefs as very shallow, but in fact, there are mesophotic reefs which go down much deeper. So we need to think about systems that can operate down to depths, a map down to depths of at least 300 meters. And just to look at the complexity again, this is a surface from a structure from motion image for the coral probiotics village offshore from KAUST. And this was produced again by Stuart Sandin's group using this technique. And you can see this overall structure. You can see some walled structures. So there's the idea. And if you look at this, you know, we're going to want to get more detailed structure. You can see this gap under this coral. You know, that's from a top-down perspective. It's not real. There is structure under that, between that and the bottom, but this is what the system creates. So the ability to image that and reproduce the structure in more detail, and not only just get the true color imagery, but begin to get other optical variables, other signatures that enable us to image that reef and characterize it, or not just a reef, but other structures that we're going to find in the benthic community. And I mentioned just the habitat complexity. We can see a pinnacle here that arises out of the bottom. And you can see here a complicated 3D structure. This is from just an image I grabbed from the Maldives that shows that very clearly. The next part of that is divers can operate down to about 30 to 40 meters under most conditions. There are ways for them to go deeper, but not necessarily to operate for long periods of time. A lot of the resources that we have extend well below 30 to 40 meters. So we need autonomous vehicles that can carry out the missions without a large and expensive mothership. This is a very expensive deal. A lot of the imagery that's being done in these depths is being done with either ROV vehicles. In this case, this is a manned underwater vehicle, part of the Ocean Explorer. And this was work that Fran Benzoni and Fabio Marchesi did as part of an exploration up in the Neom region, where they're able to look at these deeper structures using this manned underwater vehicle. So we need vehicles that can image again, they can sample, they can navigate clearly at these depths, and as I said, work clearly at depths down to at least 300 meters. The need for this in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia is very large right now. One of my former students is head of a new organization, which is the National Organization for the Conservation of Coral Reefs and Sea Turtles. In order to have an effective organization, he needs to know what are his assets or resources in the region. If we do that with a ship or with a ROV or even a human vehicle, that's going to take a lot of time and it require very expensive resources, either using human-powered or human-occupied vehicle, or an ROV requires an expensive mothership and then extended amounts of time to cover that area. So robotic systems that could carry this out automatically would dramatically change our ability both to map it initially, as was stated earlier by one of the speakers, talking about obtaining of baselines, and then 2, being able to track that over time to look at changes due to either climate change, due to the environmental variability, whatever processes. And then in robotic manipulation, again, I think Raquel may talk about this later. She's working with inoculating corals with probiotics when we get extreme heating events to help counteract that. As Maram talked about earlier with the Shusha Island Reef Restoration Initiative, there's a lot of, in the coral nursery, there's going to be a lot of manipulation needed. So we need robots that are able to do dosing, they're able to do sampling, they're able to do deployment, and able to monitor that environment, again, over long periods of time. So multiple capabilities. Being an oceanographer, I work more in the ocean environment. This is a mesoscale feature in the Red Sea from about 2 months ago, where we see this frontal structure here with warmer water to the south, cooler water to the north. With that, a significant signature in chlorophyll, giving us an indication of productivity. We're using, tradition in the current day and age, we're using autonomous underwater vehicles. This is a sea glider system. We're also experimenting with Triton surface vehicles. The surface vehicles, we'll have an experiment going out next week where we'll have 3 Triton surface vehicles carrying ADCPs, so we can measure the current structure across this front, and the autonomous underwater vehicles capturing the vertical structure, something like this image here, where you see the chlorophyll and then temperature contours overlaid on that. One of the issues that we have is these systems are dynamic. And I think there was a question earlier that related to how do we optimally sample a system? And it may not be having the vehicles sample in the same mode. If we couple this with computer models, it may be we sort out ways to resolve the uncertainty of the models. So we use the models. There are a couple approaches. One is that we use the models to minimize uncertainty, and to achieve that, we reposition the vehicles according to the needs of the models. Another one approach, and this is something that Shinkyu and I have talked about, is optimizing the onboard intelligence so that the vehicles themselves are able to map out these features and know how to adjust their positions appropriately to sample these kinds of features as they're dynamic in time and space. So this is multi-vehicle. So as I said, we're looking at ways to implement on-vehicle autonomy. Inter-vehicle collaboration is extremely important. Communications, decision-making, and this ties into sort of central computing that we might have in a large-scale computer model running on shore, connected to the versus the intelligence we put on the vehicles to carry out this. And we're looking at, when we look at this type of multi-vehicle operation, we're looking at multiple types of vehicles. It could be UAVs. We've been using a UAV for mapping coastal systems in a number of different applications, whether it's this or a winged drone is up in the air, but we can equip these with thermal and multispectral sensors. We have an experiment going out next week with the Ocean Arrow Tritons and sea gliders. The Tritons will be performing ADCP measurements across the frontal structure. The gliders looking at the subsurface structure associated with that. Then we have the deep ocean. The deep ocean can go down to 11,000 meters. And that gets broken into various zones. One of the major challenges that's going on in the world is that we know very little about the sea bottom. So there's a major effort co-sponsored by the Nippon Foundation and GEBCO, called the Seabird 2030 project to map out the bathymetry of the ocean. Now, and when we look at the ocean bathymetry, this is a hypsograph that was put together by NOAA. And what we see when we split the ocean in two, or look at the depth distribution, the midpoint, 50% of the ocean is basically deeper than 4,000 meters. And this is a exceedingly strong or significant challenge because it's very difficult to work in the deep ocean. We can map the depth of the ocean from surface ships using multi-beam, but we need to know more about that structure than just how deep it is. The depth of it does not tell us what's there. So we need systems that can go and observe that. This is just put together by the Nippon GEBCO collaboration or the Seabird project, and 72% of the ocean is between 3,000 and 5,750 meters. And they're hoping, their goal is to resolve this at 400 by 400 meter increments. Now, when we look at what's mapped so far, it's less than 25% of the global ocean. The gray areas that you see were mapped in 2021 or by 2021. The red areas were areas that were added. One of the things that you'll notice is one of the most sparsely sampled parts of the ocean is the Indian Ocean, and that includes the Red Sea, although the Red Sea is getting since the formation of KAUST, the Red Sea has gotten a lot more attention. But this is a very poorly understood area. And one of the things you may notice is a stripe here of sampling. That's from the Malaysian Airlines Flight 370. So that was done to map that out. We had to have a plane accident to drive our sampling of the deep ocean. We need to understand that better. When we look at the ocean, you may look at maps like this and you say, wow, that's very impressive. Look at the complexity of that structure. The problem is, if we go back to that previous map, you see, we've actually sampled very little of that. We infer most of that from gravitational data that comes from satellite remote sensing. So we don't actually know the details of the structure. When I first started in the Red Sea, I was using this data to determine where I would fly my gliders. And there was a line that had a seamount on it. So when I started the glider flying at 100, I lowered it at 100 meter increments because that was the range of our altimeter. In the end, there was no seamount there, but that was the quality 10 years ago of the imagery, of the bottom imagery that we had. So if you took the GEBCO data, I'm using my underwater gliders as geological sub-bottom profilers. Somehow I don't think they've got enough energy to achieve that, but just in contrast, when we look at Mars, and this is a geological map that the U.S. Geological Survey put together, geological characteristics of the surface of Mars. This is the digital elevation map, totally mapped the entire planet. And this is mapped at 5 by 5 meter pixel size, 25 square meters. And this is a mosaic image, and they made a mosaic. We've talked about digital twins. We've made a mosaic image of the entire planet. As I said, most of the ocean, we have less than 25% of that. 70% of the global area has not been mapped. So this is a huge need. And it's, our technologies today, we have ship-based operations. This is a drilling ship. So this is not the tool we're going to use to map the oceans. It's meant to go to a single place at a time, spend a lot of time obtaining deep wells. But this costs $72 million a year, or about $200,000 a day to operate. The next level we can go to is we can go to research ships with tethered vehicles such as the little Hercules ROV. Those kind of ships are going to be at a minimum 50 to 150,000, depending on the ship. And then we're now coming at, Woods Hole, after the loss of Nereus, came up with a new scheme with the Orpheus, which is a light, small vehicle which can be deployed down to the sea bottom. So coming up for smaller, lighter, less expensive vehicles. And then we have the need for supporting technologies. Clearly, sensing is an ongoing field of development in the areas of miniaturization. We're looking for tools for onboard genomic analysis. I know that the people at the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute are working on those, probably others as well. We need to be able to both grab and return samples that maybe we can't analyze in situ. Communications, of course, is an ongoing issue. Electromagnetic communications are limited underwater. And there's been work on optical communications, but those length scales are on the order of tens of meters, not kilometers or longer. The only long range communications that we have is acoustic. Physical manipulation, and we talked about that earlier in terms of some of these reef initiatives, the ability to manipulate things. Of course, AI-assisted decision-making and interpretation of data sets is only going to grow. This is a critical area. Another one, we're looking at long-term deployments, and the fundamental issue is power. There's power storage. Those technologies are continuing to develop. And there's power harvesting. There was there's been some development of technologies that use the thermal gradient. You use materials that melt and solidify, and with temperature ranges of about 10 degrees, you can develop some power harvesting in that way. But for deep ocean vehicles, this is going to be a major issue. Several years ago, a group of us had a proposal for using bacterial fuel cells and to get energy out of the ocean environment that way. So the future oceans, we need to develop deep ocean swarm capabilities for mapping and imaging large areas. So we need not only the map of the depth, but we need to know what's there, whether it's biological, geological, chemical, whatever that structure. Of course, we need improvements in deep imaging, lighting technologies, low light technologies, multi-spectral, multi to hyperspectral. Just the visible spectrum alone doesn't give us all the information we need. And then sampling and analysis technologies on board. We've got the Mars rovers, and they're able to do some sampling, do some measurements on board. For example, the drilling capabilities. They've been looking for biogeochemical signals on Mars in that arena. In summary, for shallow water work, we need mapping, we need imaging, we need manipulation, we need monitoring. For the oceanographic, we need onboard and collaborative intelligence, and we need to couple that with what I call sectoral intelligence. And we're not talking about governmental agencies in the US. We're talking about computers running full-scale models that are integrated with the sampling modes. And then for the deep ocean, we need untethered autonomy, and with that untethered autonomy, hopefully long timescales. We need mapping, imaging, and sampling capabilities. And like above, we need the capability for managing swarms or fleets of vehicles to optimize the sampling. Again, the comment made earlier was we don't necessarily need to do the lawnmower, but we need to sample things intelligently that give us the most amount of information with the least amount of effort. So that's a quick overview. As I say, it encompasses a lot of things other people will say. So it's not, but try to get an overview of what I see as some of the major needs in our work. With that, I'll take any questions.